The Titans-Steelers game we already talked about. The Bucs-Jets game started off early with a safety. The Jaguars actually get the first points on the board against the Chiefs with a safety, and they ended up losing that game 28-2. And then the Redskins-Eagles started off with a safety. I've never seen have there even been 4 safeties in a season? How often does that happen? But just a cool little stat. I thought it was cool. Another cool thing, a record set for number of touchdowns thrown in week 1. 63 throwing touchdowns occurred this week. Now, let's face it, a lot of that had to do with Peyton Manning throwing 7. I mean, you don't get to see that too often. I think the last time that happened was 1953. Nope, 1969. I'm sorry, I've just found the stat in front of me. 1969 was the last time that stat happened. As long as we're talking about Peyton Manning, only the 6th player in history to throw 7 TDs in a game. And how would you like to be part of this list? Sid Luckman, Hall of Famer, Chicago Bears, 1943. George Blanda, Houston Oilers, Hall of Famer, 1961. Y.A. Tittle, New York Giants, Hall of Famer, 1962. You also had Adrian Burke of the Eagles in 1954, and Joe Kapp of the Vikings, 1969. It's not bad company to be in. And like I said earlier, you don't throw 7 touchdowns by a fluke. You do it because you are a superior field general with your team. So, that being said, let's move on to the Fantasy Football Weekly. Fantasy Football Weekly is brought to you by T-Lander and T-Lander. Being arrested or accused of a crime can be a life-altering experience. So if you the best representation. With a combined 60-plus years of experience, T-Lander and T-Lander can handle any situation from traffic tickets to felony charges. Based out of DuPage County, T-Lander and T-Lander is the firm you need to get the results you want. Call now at 630-858-0880 to set up your consultation. T-Lander and T-Lander, simply the best. A lot of surprises this week in fantasy, including Anquan Boldin's big game versus the Packers. And this is a guy who was got at a premium. You could be drafting this guy in the 8th, 9th, 10th round in some leagues. And what did he do? 13 catches, 208 yards, and a touchdown. 13 catches, 208 yards, and a touchdown. To put that in perspective, his former team, the Baltimore Ravens, who wanted him to take a pay cut from $4 million to $2 million, and because he refused, they traded him to the 49ers for a 6th round draft pick, highway robbery. Their 4 receivers in their opening game had a total of 15 receptions, 215 yards, and 1 touchdown. So the 4 receivers on the Ravens only managed 2 more catches and only 7 more yards than Anquan Boldin.
He looks like Jerry Rice out there.
I think that is definitely worth the $2 million extra that he wanted. And why didn't they want to pay him that $2 million extra? Well, because as we were talking about earlier, they wanted to get younger and on defense. They wanted to sign the Elmas Duverville, and they wanted to extend the contracts of guys like a Terrell Suggs, who's going to be coming up for contract soon, and a couple other players on that. And now, I'm not going to lambast them too bad because they got Elvis Dumerville for 5 years, whereas Anquan Boldin's only got 1 or 2 more years left on his contract. And they definitely are looking down the road. However, in a league where quality players are hard to come by and where game changers are hard to come by, to let a guy go who only cost you $4 million for a 6th round pick, a guy who single-handedly got you through the playoffs and was probably the 2nd most valuable player on your team in winning the Super Bowl, to let him go for nothing more than a 6th round pick and over $2 million, for shame. You can always, in the NFL, scrape up $2 million to pay a prime player. So, that's my take on Anquan Boldin. But, coming up next week, I expect another big game from him. He's going against the Seattle Seahawks, who are a much better defensive team than the Packers. And they've got the two big corners, and especially Richard Sherman, who likes to contest Revis for that title of number one corner in the league. And with Revis coming off an injury, he might just have some clout behind that claim. However, I'm hard-pressed to say to sit Bolden this week, so I'm starting him. I've got him in one of my fantasy leagues, and I'm starting him over Mike Wallace, who laid that giant egg for me last week with that one-catch, 15-yard performance. So I'm going Anquan Bolden, even against a good defense like the Seahawks. Colin Kaepernick has obviously established a trust for him, and Anquan Bolden is one of the best third-down receivers in the league. He catches in traffic, he doesn't drop a lot, and he doesn't fumble. I'm going with Anquan Bolden this week. We also talked about Brian Hartline. Going to be should be a big game for the Dolphins. They are facing the Colts. Colts play a lot of close games. I like Brian Hartline. He's coming off a 9-reception, 114-yard performance, and Ryan Tannehill obviously has a trust in him. He can hit him deep, which he did this past week for a long touchdown, or he can hit him in the short intermediate routes, third downs. He loves going to Hartline when he's under pressure. He obviously doesn't have that type of trust for Mike Wallace. So I'm a big fan of Brian Hartline. And another big surprise this week was the tight end for the Browns. We talked a lot about tight ends last week and the past couple weeks, especially guys, obviously the big three, Jimmy Graham, Jason Witten, Tony Gonzalez. I also talked about a sleeper in Jared Cook, who, if you followed my advice, had a big week for you last week and who you should continue to start. But Jordan Cameron, tight end for the Browns, came out, put up a big game on the Dolphins. 9 receptions, 108 yards, and a touchdown. Now, I don't expect to have that kind of reception level for him going forward. The Browns abandoned the run in a close game, which they came out and said was a huge mistake. If they're going to win, they're going to ride Trent Richardson to do it. So even though he had a kind of a bad week, don't bench him. He's going to have a breakout week, trust me. But Jordan Cameron has obviously established himself as Brandon Whedon's favorite target, and at his size will be a primary red zone threat. So especially in a league where you have a flex player, Jordan Cameron is a guy to look at. He's also a good backup if you already have an elite tight end. If you don't have an elite tight end, start him. I think he's going to have a pretty good game for you. And another team to avoid for your defense, Steelers, drop them. Le'Veon Bell, the running back, looks like he's going to miss a month and not just the first week, which means the Steelers have no run game. Their pass game was already pretty anemic because of Antonio Brown and Emmanuel Sanders are just not the elite type of receivers that you want to get. Nobody's got the fear of God in them because Emmanuel Sanders is going on a 20-yard in route. And that defense faced some big losses, including Larry Foote, out for the season, inside linebacker. They also lost their center and Marquise Pouncey for the year. They lost 3 people for the year. That offense is not going to have a hard time staying on the field, and that defense is going to have a hard time stopping people while it's out there. Get rid of the Steelers' D, especially this week when they're facing a tough Cincinnati team that's going to be looking for revenge after losing a close one to the Bears. So, I'm going to give you 5 to sit and 5 to start for the upcoming week of fantasy football. The first one to sit is Mike Wallace. We already talked about 1 catch, 15 yards, and after the game during his press conference, he was seething, he was unhappy. Instead of touting the win and working as a decoy, he was mad. Well, he obviously doesn't have a rhythm with the quarterback. Quarterback obviously can't trust him. It's going to take some time for those two to get acclimated. I wouldn't drop him from your team because in the coming weeks he does have talent, he does have speed, and he could have a bust-out game at any time. And once he does get a rhythm, he could be very dangerous. However, right now the trust isn't there, and against a good Colts team that's good at playing close games, and when I say close games, I mean Andrew Luck is 10-1 in games decided less than 7 points. That's what I'm talking about. So I'd sit Mike Wallace. But you need a receiver? Who are you going to start? Julian Edelman. Julian Edelman, receiver for the Patriots. He had 2 touchdowns last week as the slot receiver, and their go-to receiver, Danny Amendola, is definitely going to miss this week and is probably going to miss a couple more weeks because, let's face it, brittle Amendola, it's what he does best. He gets hurt. Torn groin. Came back in the second half despite it, played through, had 7 catches, had a great game. But going forward, he is unreliable. He's hurt again. And who's going to step up? Tom Brady knows Julian Edelman. He's the only returning receiver from last year, and he caught 2 touchdowns this week, and they're going against the Jets. The Jets squeak by a pathetic Buccaneers team. They are not going to squeak by a team led by Tom Brady. So I look for a big week from Julian Edelman. So start him. Sit Ahmad Bradshaw. They're playing the Dolphins this week, who is a very good defensive team. I mean, don't let the fact that they played the Browns think that, okay, they just played a bad team. No, they are a good defensive team. And Ahmad Bradshaw was the splashy free agent that the Indianapolis Colts got to boost their run game. However, he's their backup. Their starter is Vic Ballard, who's a good guy. Pick him up. Don't start Ahmad Bradshaw. He's not going to get you squat. Avoid that. So who do we start? I like Deshaun Jackson, Philadelphia. He's obviously the only receiver that Michael Vick's singling out. Riley Cooper was supposed to be their number 2. He only got 2 catches in the entire game. Caught 2 out of, I believe, 5 targets. Yeah, 2 catches for 18 yards. Between Deshaun Jackson and Brent Selleck, he ain't seeing much. But Deshaun Jackson, so fast, good hands, and Vic has had a rapport with him for the past few years. And with Jeremy Maclin out for the year, Deshaun Jackson's the true number 1 threat on that team. And they're going against the Chargers. The Chargers are an enigmatic team who you can't trust and are weak defensively. Put Deshaun Jackson in there because the Eagles may run 100 plays and he'll probably get 20 of them. So put him in there. Speaking of the Chargers, start Phillip Rivers. I know he had that epic collapse in the game this past Monday against the Texans, made some really bad decisions and ended up costing his team the lead when he threw that pick 6 to Brian Cushing. However, when you face the Eagles, you're going to get a lot of opportunities to play on offense. As I just said, they want to run 100 plays a game. That means the other offense is going to be running a lot of plays too. And the San Diego Chargers, despite all they've said, still look to remain a passing team that are just going to ride the arm of Phillip Rivers until it falls off or until they fire the coaching and GM staff there. And since he's going against the Eagles, even with, you can manage and weather the storm of turnovers he's going to give you because he's going to put up some points too. So, Phillip Rivers, if you're weak at quarterback, he's a good one to put in there. Avoid Greg Jennings. I warned people not to pick up Greg Jennings in the beginning of the year. He's the big free agent that Minnesota got to try and replace Percy Harvin. Here's what he is. He's old and he's playing with a quarterback that likes to underthrow his receivers by 10 yards. And they're going up against the Bears that have 2 Pro Bowl cornerbacks, one of which, Peanut Tillman, had 2 interceptions last week. And the Bears defense doesn't look to be that much weaker for the loss of Brian Urlacher. They look good against the Bengals. They'll look even better against the Minnesota Vikings passing attack. So do not start Greg Jennings.
He looks like Jerry Rice out there.
He does not look Jerry Rice out there. He's going to get schooled. You'd be lucky to get 2 catches for 20 yards out of him. Also, do not start DeMarco Murray, running back for the Dallas Cowboys. They're going against the Chiefs. Chiefs, good defense. We talked about this in our preseason look. The Chiefs are a team that had 7 Pro Bowlers despite a 2-14 record. They have talent. They play solid football, and they have a coach and a quarterback that can control the ball and go for long stretches on offense. He's not going to get the ball much. They're probably going to be playing from behind, and in my week 2 predictions, you'll see I'm going to have the Chiefs winning this one. And DeMarco Murray is an injury-prone running back who's never averaged, except for that one stretch of the first season where he broke out, more than 4 yards a carry, and he's untrustworthy in the end zone. The Cowboys like to throw it when they get into the red zone. They don't like to hand it off much. I'm avoiding DeMarco Murray. Who do you start? Jared Cook at tight end for St. Louis. They're facing the Falcons. A solid defense, but Jared Cook has established himself as Sam Bradford's favorite weapon, and he creates a huge mismatch. He's another one of those basketball-playing tight ends that can box out, create separation. So I start him. Who we benching? Emmanuel Sanders, Pittsburgh wide receiver against the Bengals. Like I said, Bengals are coming for vengeance, and against a divisional rival like the Steelers, they are going to bring the pain. You've got 3 starters out for the year for the Steelers. You've got a great defense in the Bengals, and you've got virtually a one-man offense with Ben Roethlisberger with the Steelers. sit Emmanuel Sanders. Don't even think about starting him in your fantasy. And on the flip side, start that Cincinnati defense. I'm looking for a big game.